Thank you. This is Councilman Eric Costello from the 11th District, Chair of the Budget and Appropriations Committee. We are here for uh, Council Resolution 20-0213R, Informational Hearing, COVID-19 Emergency Spending. Mayor Costello, 11th District, Chair of the Committee. We're joined by, bear with me. We're joined by Vice Chair of the Committee, Councilman Leon Pinkett from the 7th District, Councilman Bill Henry, 4th District, member of the
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Isaac Yitzi Schleifer, 5th District, member of the committee. We are also joined by, I do not see Councilwoman Sneed. Are you on the call? I do not see Councilwoman Danny McCray from the 2nd District. Are you on the call? And then the 7th member of the committee, Council Vice President Sharon Green Middleton from the 6th District, is unable to join us today. She is at on a Zoom meeting for NACO and MACO in her capacity as president of MACO. So she regrets that she is unable to join us today. We are also joined by Nina Themelis and Matt Stegman on behalf of Mayor Jack Young, and Dominic McAlilly on behalf of Council President Brandon Scott. Before we begin, I'm going to turn it over to the sponsor of the resolution, Councilman Leon Pinkett, for brief introductory remarks. Councilman Pinkett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The fiscal impacts of this COVID-19 pandemic are potentially greater than any that we've seen, at least in a century. It's anticipated that for fiscal year 21, the city will experience approximately $68 million in revenue shortfalls, with fiscal year 21 revenue shortfalls exceeding $103 million. Just last year, the city experienced the ransomware attack, which caused us to scramble to meet the $18 million cost to restore our systems, as well as the deferred income that we lost. Many of those expenditures happened without the use of local or MBE, WBE firms. But that $18 million pales in comparison to our current emergency. It's anticipated that by June 30th, that the city will spend almost $50 million in COVID-19 related expenditures. While we anticipate that a significant portion of those funds will be reimbursed through federal stabilization funds, it is still critical that when we deploy these resources, that we not only allow for they not only allow for us to secure the services or resources, but that those expenditures also prioritize the use of local and MBE, WBE businesses and contractors that are suffering greatly under this pandemic. This hearing is an opportunity for us to review the procurement processes that are currently being employed by the city for COVID-19 emergency spending, but also to evaluate the diversity of vendors that are being solicited. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate this hearing.
Thank you, Councilman. This bill was referred to the Office of the Mayor, the Health Department, Baltimore City Public School System, Business Opportunity Office, and the Department of Finance. I know that Dr. Sonia Santelises is unable to join us today. She is currently with the mayor in meetings, so she regrets that she is unable to join us. We do have, I see Melissa Broom from the school system. And Melissa, I believe that you can confirm that Adam Cohen, who is Chief of Staff to the CEO, is on the call and will be speaking on behalf of the school system today. Is that correct? Melissa?
And
Unmuted.
she'll be on the call by 3:30.
Who's going to be on at 3:30?
The Chief of Staff, Allison Perkins Cohen, will be on by 3:30.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. We have agency reports. Marguerite, please correct me if I'm wrong. I see reports from BCPS, Health, and Finance. Do we have any other agency reports that came in?
No, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. I see that we have Tisha Edwards from the Mayor's Senior Team on the call, who is the Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of Children and Family Success. Tisha, I'm going to kick it to you if you have any introductory remarks on the administration before we proceed.
Sure. Thank you, Councilman Costello and other members of the City Council. What I would like for the council to know and the public at large is that this has been a very concerted effort on behalf of the city in terms of having a comprehensive response to COVID-19. This is a public health issue that has many, many implications regarding service delivery, ensuring that we are meeting not only the health and overall wellness needs of residents of Baltimore City, and the administration has been extraordinarily focused. We have leveraged every city agency to be a part of this historic effort. And we are very committed to making sure that we sustain and maintain city services while also having a responsible response to the pandemic. So I appreciate the committee bringing the administration forward to talk about the fiscal impact of this issue. As Councilman Pickett has said, this is something like we've never seen before, and it is going to have long-term impacts on the finances of our city. And I am, excited about the presentation that finance is going to be doing to help level set and to create a level of awareness and visibility for the council to understand the challenge that we are currently facing. So thank you, Councilman Costello, for creating this forum for this presentation and information to be shared with the public at large.
Thank you, Tisha. And I'd like to publicly acknowledge and thank Mayor Young and his administration's efforts. I know that you all have been working on complete overdrive since the onset of this, and just the work that's been done around helping our residents who are experiencing homelessness, food security, small business reopening and recovery efforts, and a host of other initiatives that I won't go through, but these efforts are certainly appreciated. We've also been joined by Council President Brandon Scott, and I think since we did introductions, we've been joined by Councilwoman Shannon Sneed, member of the committee, and Councilman Chris Burnett, 8th District, Councilwoman Sneed's from the 13th, and that appears to be everyone. Council President Scott, Councilman Pickett's already made introductory remarks. Certainly turn it over to you as President of the Council for any remarks before we get started.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, for the introduction of this resolution. We all know that COVID-19 is a crisis like we have never seen before. Want to say thank you to everyone who's worked hard every day to make sure that the city is moving forward and that we're doing and attacking the things that we need to tackle in Baltimore to keep our citizens' health and safe. And this is just a way for us to provide that oversight and accountability that we all know this council deeply believes in. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. President. So we have agency reports from Health, City Schools, and Finance. Health is obviously the lead agency in terms of responding to the pandemic. But what I'd like to do, just because of the focus on fiscal matters here, is defer to the Department of Finance lead for this hearing only. So with that, I'm assuming that Daniel is going to be Daniel Ramos, who is the Deputy Budget Director for BBMR. Is that correct?
This is Henry Raymond. I'll lead the discussion.
Understood. Thank you, Director. And I believe that you have a presentation. Before you begin, Marguerite, would you kindly put that presentation up so that everyone can see it?
Miss Marva James is going to, there it is. There it is.
And
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if it
Yes.
hasn't already, can we have that emailed to us too, just in case WebEx has issues as it had recently?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mr. President. I believe Matt Stegman may have sent it out, but only to committee members. Matt, can you please make sure this gets disseminated to the president, the entire council, as well as the president's legislative team?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I will send that off right now.
Thank you, sir. Okay, and Mara, you're going to be navigating here, and Director Raymond's going to be running point. Do I have that correct?
Correct.
All right, Director, take it away.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, President Scott, Chairman Costello, Vice Chairman Pinkett, and honorable members of the committee. We'll go to the first page of the slide. I'm going to be discussing today the expenditures that we've experienced related to the COVID-19 emergency. I'll also discuss the revenue impact for both fiscal 20, the current year, and fiscal 21. I'll also have remarks regarding the overall fiscal impact related to revenue, the decrease in revenues and increase in expenditures. And under the category Other Considerations, we'll have the discussion regarding emergency procurement, closeout, and federal support. So moving to slide 3. The expenditures are essentially in 5 categories, and I'll walk through the 5. The big picture overall is that for the 6-month period beginning April of 20 through September 30 of 20, which represents the 4th quarter of the current fiscal year and the 1st quarter of the new fiscal year, fiscal 21, we're projecting to spend $125.6 million across the 5 categories of expenditures. The first category is the core city services. This is related to pay premium for fire and police, pay premium for other frontline city employees, certain licenses and technology that were required to enable city workers to work remotely and access Microsoft Outlook, and other public safety costs, such as hotel, motel, while they're awaiting test results, or those who felt that they were exposed to COVID. So again, the matrix for all of these categories is a 6-month period. And for the core city services, the estimate through September is approximately $16.1 million. Moving to the next slide, category 2 is the health response. This essentially was for testing, contact tracing, personal protection equipment, public health campaigns, i.e. advertisements, and emergency medical services. For the 6-month period ending September 30, the projected expense is approximately $34.7 million. Moving to the next slide, the third category, isolation and quarantine. This is for housing and transportation services for people experiencing homelessness, shelter staffing, hotel rooms, temporary shelters, hotel costs, case managers. For the 6-month period, it's approximately $16.5 million as an estimate. The next slide, slide 6. Category 4 is resident assistance. This essentially is food distribution, senior meal delivery, grocery supplement, laptops for Baltimore City Public School System students, and rental assistance. The estimate for this is $52.9 million. And finally, category 5, small business support, which is $5.5 million, made up of 2 categories. Personal
Direct-
protection equipment production
Director.
grants, $500,000.
Director,
Yes.
Director,
Can you
please
hear me?
pause for 1 second. Marguerite, could you please send the invite to Councilman Chris Burnett via email? He needs the password and is unable to log in.
Mr. Chair, I'm in now.
No, he's in.
We got it resolved. Thank you.
He's in.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Director, I apologize for interrupting. Please continue.
Okay, thank you. So again, the fifth category, category 5, small business support, a total of $5.5 million for small business stimulus grants for $5 million, and also for protective equipment for $500,000. So these 5 categories, moving to the next slide, expenditures, totals $125.6 million for the period April of 20 through September of 20. Now, moving to the next slide for revenue. For fiscal 20, we're projecting a loss of $68.8 million, which equates to approximately $20 million per month while the social distancing mandates are in place. The primary areas of revenue loss include tourism, transportation, and income taxes. For fiscal 21, the revenue loss is approximately $103 million. Combined, the fiscal 20 loss plus the fiscal 21 loss, it's approximately $171 million over a 15-month period, which represents April of 20 through June 30 of 21. Now, the matrix that's displayed, again, is a 6-month matrix, which shows that the revenue loss from April of 20 through September of 20 is $96 million. And again, $171 million from April of 20 through fiscal 21, ending at June 30 of 21. So now we'll turn to the next slide, the overall fiscal impact. There's a lot of uncertainty about when we will recover, what economic damage will have been done, how many businesses will have been lost. But based on the information that we presently have available, for a 6-month period from April of 20 through September of 20, we believe the economic impact cumulatively is about $221.6 million. And this is made up of the reduction of revenue and the increased expenditures. We'll turn to the next slide. The other considerations, there's 3 areas that I want to briefly discuss. One is federal support. As you are probably aware, the city has received approximately $103 million of federal funds from the CARES Act. The use of these funds are very restrictive. They can only be used for unbudgeted expenses directly related to COVID-19. They cannot be used to backfill revenue presently. And as you can understand from the presentation that I've given regarding the 5 categories of expenditures, the $103 million is virtually exhausted. Now, in terms of closeout, supplemental appropriations will be required for agencies that will have appropriation deficiencies at June 30 based on COVID-related responses. And there will be more information coming out about agencies with the deficiencies when the 3rd quarter projections are completed and presented. Now I'll turn my attention to emergency procurement. By charter, the finance director has delegated emergency procurement authority in accordance with Article 6, Section 11. And essentially what this authority allows is for an agency head to request an emergency procurement that has to be approved by the director of finance. If the emergency request is granted, we do not go to the Board of Estimates until after the fact. We still have to present the contract to the board, but the emergency authorization that the finance director has regards the public welfare of the city. It could be economic loss, life and death issues such as COVID-19, or physical infrastructure collapse, such as a couple of years ago, the 26th Street collapse. So the way we do this is the agency head makes the request for emergency. They coordinate with the Bureau of Procurement. Each emergency is approved by me if it requires Board of Estimates approval. If it's less, the acting city purchasing agent, Keisha Brown, has delegated authority. But all of the requests are vetted. All of the requests require requests for quotes. Background checks are done. We reach out to other jurisdictions that have previously used the vendors to obtain satisfaction that they have the ability to perform the work and have performed satisfactorily in the past. All of this is done in coordination with the law department because the contracts have to be negotiated, prepared, and executed, because ultimately that documentation is presented to the Board of Estimates for approval. So I think that's a pretty good sum of what the emergency delegated authority that I possess as finance director and how the city executes it. And I think at this point, I'll entertain any questions.
Thank you, Director. Thank you, Director Raymond. I know that we had some specific questions from Councilman Pinkett that were in the resolution. Matt, is there any additional responses, or are you all ready to get into questions from council members? Mara, if you could take down the presentation, please. Matt Stegman.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Or Director Raymond, does Director Raymond or Matt Stegman, there were specific questions from Councilman Pinkett in the resolution.
Okay, I'll address to the best of my ability.
Please and thank you.
We have provided information regarding purchase orders, the name of the contractors, the addresses, the total dollar value of the contract start dates, the term of the contracts, the agency that utilized or requested the emergency procurement, and also the payments to date. We've also provided whether the contractor is a certified MBE or WBE, and they all happen to be WBEs. The contract selection method is all emergency procurement or a change order to an existing contract for the services that were required. And again, for Each emergency procurement over 5,000, the contracts will be presented to the Board of Estimates. And globally, all of the emergency procurements were related to food distribution, transportation, hotels, motels for first responders and homeless, the personal protection equipment. Those were the majority of the expenditures that have occurred to date and that we believe will occur ongoing at least through September 30, which represents the projection of 125 million.
Okay, I just wanted to know, I appreciate that. I just wanted to know if there was anything additional to add. I know that Finance Matt Stegman circulated a agency comments report from Finance colleagues, especially Council President Scott and Councilman Pinkett. I trust that you have seen that.
And Mr. Chairman, this is Matt Stegman. I did just confirm that the report from the Department of Finance, which does contain all of that information on some of the specific purchase orders, it is up on Legistar. So just wanted to point that out for members of the council who are not on the committee and members of the public who may be watching.
Thank you. All right, Council President, do you have any questions, sir?
Actually, that was my first question was a comment, Mr. Chair, that the thing was on Legislaw. I was actually looking at it on my screen. But to that point, I do have a follow up for the director. Just seeing some of the other purchases, and want to see like. When we're dealing with a situation like this, and I know it's tough because it's not always an opportunity, and I see a lot of local Baltimore businesses, but we still see some from out of town with some significant things. Can you walk us through that decision and how we're trying to center these emergency purchases around Baltimore businesses and Baltimore small businesses? But what kind of decision is made when you might have to go outside, because we know we want to benefit, not to say we don't care about those other businesses, but we want to benefit the people that we know are hurting here as much as possible.
Yeah. First, I would say that we always want to try to give opportunity to local businesses because we want our local businesses to be able to recover. Now, as it relates to the type of services, commodities, and goods that were required to address COVID-19, we attempted to procure from the vendors that had what we needed. Now, keep in mind, primarily the things that we needed were hand sanitizing products and the personal protection equipment, masks, gloves, face shields, etc. We had to get these commodities from those vendors that had them, regardless of where they were located, because of the quantities that we required. And a lot of the local MBE, WBEs do not have the types of commodities that we needed, i.e. hand sanitizer and the personal protection equipment. It seems that for the most part, the MBE, WBEs are able to provide limited food services for us, but not the heavy lift items that cost the most money, the PPE and things of that nature, or the hotels and motels that were required for sheltering, and the testing equipment for COVID-19. But we will always try to make opportunities available to local businesses because we want to be able to help them stand back up once this event is over, to help us economically recover, because the city will need the revenue.
Thank you. And to that point, when you're talking about MBEs and local MBEs and WBEs here in the city, and you brought up one that something I wanted to highlight. Just thinking about the opportunity for, well, I saw we use a WBE and we use Jake's Catering for food. But have you guys thought about like spreading that around to all these other small restaurants and businesses that can provide those catering services, because we know they're hurting and suffering, and then how we can try to benefit more of the businesses to try to help them out as much as possible.
Okay. I'm joined with Deputy Budget Director Daniel Ramos, and I'll allow him to address that.
Hi, Council President. This is Daniel Ramos. I don't believe there's anyone from the EOC here, but I know that they made it a commitment to spreading the wealth around and making sure that they were finding neighborhood, city-based caterers, and some that don't traditionally do catering. These are normal restaurants that have had to change their business model. So I know that that has been a priority of the EOC, and they've tried to spread it out as much as humanly possible with kind of what our demand is.
Yeah, I have no doubt in that, but I don't see that reflected in the document, which is my only issue. So I would just like for us to press even further on that.
Okay, I'll make sure that's conveyed. And then the one thing I want to make sure that we highlight too, we recognize that a lot of the WBs, MBEs did not have the capacity to make some of the heavy duty, PPE that we needed, and that was the administration, carved out some money to be able to send a BDC to give small grants to allow some businesses to be able to pivot their business model to producing this type of work, so that we were keeping that funding and that expense here in the city.
Daniel, Mr. President, if I can chime in with a little clarification on that. Just from being involved with the Small Business Recovery Task Force, the first installment of $50,000 that went toward grants, about 60% of that went to MBE and WBE. The second installment for grants is $100,000. That application period closed this Monday, a few days ago, and the expectation is that we're going to see similar numbers. And then on the procurement of PPE from local firms, there was $400,000 allocated. The first two awards were made last week, and both were to minority-owned firms that are in the city. One of which being Citywide Youth Development, who I know you and I are both very familiar with, as well as Councilman Pinkett. So there are groups that are doing
They
great
made my mask.
out in the community. Yeah, they made your mask, exactly. So anyway, back to you, Mr. President.
No, that was it for me. That was it for me for now, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Councilman Pinkett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I had just a few questions. And thank you, Director Raymond. I know you mentioned some of the tasks that it was difficult to find MBE, WBEs to perform. And I just got the list of the Excel spreadsheet with all of it, so I haven't really had a chance to review it. But I know that we have a lot of MBE, WBEs in the area of cleaning as well as transportation. Can you speak to our use of MBEs in those particular areas?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part of the question.
That while we don't have MBE, WBEs in a lot of the specific areas as it relates to this COVID-19, we do have quite a significant presence in the area of cleaning as well as transportation services. Can you speak to utilizing MBE, WBEs in those areas?
We would use those if they have the skill sets for doing the type of disinfecting and addressing the COVID virus. The answer would be yes. And we would also try to do that for transportation, which essentially was food distribution, delivering food to the various locations, as well as transporting individuals, primarily homeless individuals, from shelter to hotel, motel.
Okay. I'll just have to do a deeper dive in the list to see where MBE, WBE is represented in cleaning as well as the transportation. Had a question related to the procurement process. I guess my first question is, you mentioned that eventually these items would go before the Board of Estimates. What's the time frame for that presentation?
Yeah, good question. I would probably say that we'll start taking items to the Board of Estimates the first week of June. They all will be taken to the board prior to the end of this fiscal year.
Okay.
Yeah, because they all require ratification by the Board of Estimates.
Okay. In addition to that, I want to just hear a little bit more about the procurement process. I know that you said that you all do a complete vetting as you evaluate the particular contracts that are presented to you by the agencies. Can you speak to a little bit, as it relates to what that vetting process looks like and how, if it is different from our typical process of vetting contracts? And then have any waivers been authorized as it relates to not using MB or not being able to find MB WBEs for particular services?
Okay, let me address the first part of your question in terms of the vetting. All suppliers are vetted through registration and city buy and question and answer process, establishing whether they have the capability to provide the service that we need. Now, we're doing this in an expedited manner, which is different from the normal RFP process because of the time constraints. So if it was a normal procurement process where we advertise, obtain proposals, establish contract review committees, evaluate the proposals, make a decision, and then go to the board, because we don't have that amount of time, we're doing the evaluation in a compressed time frame. So as I indicated earlier, we're doing requests for quote process where they provide a quote, we negotiate, we still identify and come to agreement on what the scope of work should be. We look for referrals from where they've done business to verify that they have the skill sets, capabilities to do the work within the time frames we need. We negotiate the time frames for the delivery of those services or goods, and then we proceed. Now, as it relates to the second part of your question about MBE waiver, that's not part of this process. My delegated authority in Article 6 is very broad. If there's an issue related to public welfare, I have the delegated authority to make the decision for an emergency and award the contract without Board of Estimates approval and provide the contract to the board after the fact. Now, what you're referring to, which is Article 5, Subtitle 28, an agency can request from the MBU office a waiver if it's sole source and they feel that because it's sole source, there's a need not to have MBE, WBE participation, or if they believe they have an emergency based on some immediacy that it needs to be done immediately, and they don't want to have or don't believe they can have MBE, WBE participation and meet whatever their requirement is. That is completely separate from the delegated emergency authority that the Director of Finance has. In other words, the delegated authority that the Finance Director has is much broader than Article 5. With the delegated authority that the Finance Director has, all procurement rules and policies are waived. That's completely different from Article 5, Subtitle 28, which is a waive, an agency requesting a MBE/WBE waiver from the MBU office.
Okay.
Yeah. So see, what the language in Article 5 says is, if an emergency exists that requires goods or services to be provided with such immediacy that the agency is unable to comply. That's different from the emergency authority that the Finance Director has, which states, in the event of an emergency of such a nature that the public welfare would be adversely affected by awaiting the approval of the Board of Estimates. So the authority that I have is much broader. I don't have to go to the MBU office. I don't have to go to the law department. I have to go to the Board of Estimates after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as I indicated earlier, the law department does assist with the procurement process by helping negotiate the contracts, preparing the contracts, and executing the contracts. But my authority is based on public welfare, not an immediate need to accomplish something. My authority is based on, is there going to be economic loss? Is there going to be some type of physical infrastructure collapse? Is it a life or death issue? Not an immediate need to not have MBE/WBE. My authority is all of the procurement rules and regulations are set to the side.
Right.
And the
So
requirement is
MBWBE
I
is not
present the documents to the Board of Estimates after the fact.
so essentially what you're saying is MBWBE is not necessarily a consideration in your decision or authority as it relates to emergency spending.
I'm not required to submit a waiver for any emergency procurement to the MBU office. We attempt to give MBE/WBE the opportunity to obtain contract and work on all of them, but there's no requirement that I submit a waiver request to the MBU office.
Gotcha. Mr. Chair, I know that there are others who may have questions. I have others as well. Can I just ask one short question?
Yes, sir.
As I look at the list, there's a diversity of expenditures. Mr. Raymond, can you explain to me what is the process to determine what type of expenditure is an emergency expenditure and what isn't an emergency expenditure? Like with some of the lunches and the hotels, are those emergency expenditures where you would have to go outside of the normal procurement process for?
Okay. I would say yes. Let's talk about the food. A lot of this food is for distribution to seniors and to children and to families that are having food insufficiency issues. There's a limited amount of food that goes to the EOC for the staff to eat because the staff is on call 24 hours a day. But the overwhelming majority of the food is for the individuals in need, families in need, the homeless population that's in need. A lot of that food is being delivered to the hotels for whether it's first line responders to have meals or for the homeless people to have meals. Now, how do we make the decision that it's an emergency? As it specifically relates to COVID-19, is it a life or death issue? If we don't do this, how does it harm the citizens or the residents? Do we want individuals, whether they're homeless, not to be able to eat? And what are the ramifications if citywide residents are not eating and starting to starve? Would that be the beginning of civil disobedience? Those are the kind of questions that I have to weigh in making an emergency decision. And of course, I'm always looking at, does it pass the smell test? Is this truly an emergency, or is there sufficient time that this could be bid out and go through the normal process? And working in consultation with the agency heads that have to provide the justification, ultimately I have to make a decision, is it an emergency or not? Is it, in this particular instance with COVID, is it life or death? If we don't put homeless people in motels to get them off the street, are they going to spread the virus in the neighborhoods that they are living in or walking through? So we want to minimize the spread of the disease. And the agencies are formulating their plans and strategies to do it. And ultimately, I have to make the decision whether to bypass the procurement policy in order to ensure the health of our communities and neighborhoods.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Raymond. I think, okay, Chairman Costello's back.
Colleagues, any other colleagues? Questions?
I got a question.
I have my hand up.
So do I.
Okay, I'm going to go to the first person that talked, which was Councilman Schleifer. Councilman Pinkett, if you can chair for a moment, I need to take an emergency phone call.
Okay, got you.
Go first if you like. If not, I'll just ask my question.
Well, I think mine's pretty quick because the long one that I had has already been discussed pretty extensively in terms of what a state of emergency means for procurement practices. But I didn't see anything in the presentation. Director Raymond, am I correct that at this point we have not placed any staff members on leave or notified anyone that they are being put on leave?
Was that for fiscal? You're referring to fiscal year 21?
I'm referring both to now and the immediate foreseeable future, which would include fiscal 21.
Okay, you broke up.
Okay, let's try that again. Let me break the question into two parts. Is there anyone who has already been put on leave now during fiscal 20? And if so, how many? And is there anyone who has already been notified that they will be put on leave in the future, including in fiscal year 21?
Okay, so put on leave for what purpose?
I would assume to save money because we are down in our revenue projections.
Okay, no, the reason I'm asking the question is because of COVID-19, we try to have as many people working remotely as possible. We have non-essential people that do not have the ability to work from home, so they're using leave. But your question is more of a budgetary question, i.e., like, are we going to be doing furloughs? Is that essentially the question?
Well,
Leave.
I'm sorry, maybe leave would be less effective than laid off.
The fiscal 21 budget does not include any layoffs.
Okay, and we have not laid anyone off currently in the 20 budget.
That is correct. No layoffs in the current fiscal year.
But there are non-essential workers who can't telework, who have to use their own leave in order to continue to receive a paycheck. And when they use up all of their own personal leave or comp time or whatever other leave they have accrued, they will not be getting paychecks. Is that correct?
That's not correct. They
Okay.
may be eligible for permission leave depending on their circumstances. For example, do they have young children at home? Because that's covered by the Federal CARES Act.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilman.
No problem.
Councilman Slicer.
Yeah, so my question is, and I'm sorry if I missed this, I'm sure I did miss it because I had to take an emergency call, which actually plays into a part of the conversation we're having. How much money was spent on meals for citizens over the course of this emergency?
Yeah, I'll turn it over to Deputy Budget Director Ramos.
We're projecting to spend $17 million on the various food initiatives through June 30.
Okay, through June 30th.
Yeah.
Okay, and where do these where are these meals taking place?
Director Edwards, are you on?
Yes, this is Tisha Edwards. I'm on. So we have over 100 meal sites across the city. We also have delivery service going to senior citizen facilities through our partnership with Meals on Wheels and Salvation Army. We have grocery boxes through our partnership with the Maryland Food Bank. In the month of May and the month of June, we will have 30,000 meal boxes per month through various sites. So we have activated 100+ locations, schools, rec centers, community organizations. I mean, we have really penetrated the city, particularly in the high concentration food insecure communities, with just a wide range of locations to access different kinds of food options.
And who is this food for? Is it only for kids and seniors, or also for families that are struggling?
So it really depends. The daily meals that we're providing at rec centers and schools are primarily for children. The Meals on Wheels are for seniors. The grocery boxes are for anybody. So we have there's a wide range of options and target groups, but the goal is that we minimize food insecurity for any Baltimore resident. So we've tried to bring together multiple funding sources, the city's funding sources, state funding sources, and federal funding sources, to be able to meet a wide range of needs in the city. So it yes, absolutely includes children and seniors, but the food boxes are for families and anyone who needs them.
Okay, so putting aside the federally funded and state funded programs that are separate, in regards to the $17 million, what programs specifically did that money go towards?
Meals on Wheels, Salvation Army, and the Maryland Food Bank. And then we're going to be rolling out a grocery supplement program in June that will hit other target groups that are not normally, whose needs are not normally met through government programs, like the immigrant population, ex-offenders, youth who are homeless, So those are the resources that the city is spending to meet the food need.
And so, who has determined how that $17 million worth of food is going to be spent? Like, who determined who that goes to?
It was through a cross-agency work group within city government. So the planning department, in their food policy team, the mayor's office of children and family success, finance sits on that work group. DGS sits on the work group. So we have multiple agencies. The health department is a lead in the work group. So we have multiple agencies that have come together that created that strategy.
Again, who makes the final decision as to what programs are done and who's serviced versus who's not serviced?
The work group, the group does it together. There is no final. I mean, we consult and problem solve, and we make those decisions together.
And who leads that group?
The Department of Planning and my office.
Okay, so the Department of Planning and your office are chairing this group.
Correct.
Okay, and then who executes on these plans?
We all do. It depends on, again, what target group we're referring to. So if it's for seniors, the health department's Department of Agency is the lead executor for ensuring that seniors' needs are being met. If it is related to youth, my office, the Mayor's Office of Children and Family Success, is the lead agency. If it is distributing the grocery boxes, that is done through DGS, the Office of Planning, and City Stat. So we have a team of folks, depending upon the target group, that is the executor for those various streams of work.
So what is your office's direct role in all of this?
So we are one of the lead agencies that creates the strategy. And we are also the coordinators of the youth and families food distribution efforts.
The family success efforts, that is running through your agency.
Yes, parts of it. Again, it's a very collaborative process, Councilman.
Okay, because I guess I'm trying to find out, because I had reached out to your office regarding a constituent that reached out to me who, they both parents had lost their jobs, and they were having issues with getting food, and they were, they're in a bad place. And I reached out to your office, and I was redirected to 211, and then 211 couldn't service them, and then I came back to your office. And so what I guess I ended up finding is that, or at least where it's left right now, is that that people with dietary restrictions are not serviced through any of these programs unless they're a senior, so or kids. But I'm saying in the family piece, those people are left behind. So I guess I'm trying to understand, from the $17 million that came from the city, I guess, if your office is running point on that, I would ask you why, why a large subset of Baltimore City's population that has dietary restrictions would be completely left behind.
So I would have to have more information about what you mean by dietary restrictions specifically.
The specific request was regarding kosher.
So we do have partners that are providing kosher meals, and I provided that information to you, and I also provided it through Deputy Chief of Staff Cheryl Goldstein. Should I resend that information to you?
Well, if you can just tell me, because I spoke to your staff as recently as yesterday. So I guess if you can just tell me what program a couple that have both lost their job and have a hardship and need food, who is it that they can reach out to and get that need service?
I don't have unfortunately, I don't have the specific name of the organizations. There are a couple in the Park Heights community that we are partnering with. And so I will be happy to provide you that information. The other thing that I will say to you is that we have a partnership with the Fund for Educational Excellence. And one of the things that we have asked that they do is when they're making grants to some of the nonprofits that support communities that have very specific needs, that is a consideration so that we can provide more nuanced resources based on specific, whether it is dietary or ethnic groups that have a particular set of palate and dietary needs. So we do have multiple strategies that we're using to get to that particular need. But I'm happy to follow up with you after this meeting.
Yeah, please do, because I mean, I'm quite disappointed that despite my numerous requests, and I've done the legwork that I've been asked to do by your staff, that we're still not at a place where, we're a population that makes up over 5% of the city is still being left behind.
I will follow up immediately after this conversation because I don't think that's an accurate statement. I hear exactly what you're saying, and I appreciate the feedback. But we have worked very hard to make sure that we have a very diverse and inclusive model for meeting the needs of Baltimore. But I absolutely hear the feedback, and I will follow up with my staff accordingly to make sure that those needs are met.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Before we go to Councilman Henry, I know Matt Stegman had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to draw attention to, given the exchange between Ms. Edwards and Councilman Schleifer, I did just drop in the chat for the information of members of the council and anybody from the public who might be tuned in, where you can find a comprehensive list of all of the different food resources that the city is offering in response to this pandemic. And all of that information, plus all of the other sort of official emergency information from the city can always be found at coronavirus.baltimorecity.gov. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make sure that we were getting that information out to folks.
Thank you, Matt, and I certainly appreciate it. I use that site on a daily basis, and I know that Tisha and her team have put together a pretty comprehensive food security program, and I know that website is constantly updated, so thank you for that. So we already did Councilman Henry while I was gone. Other colleagues? I see Councilman Vice Chair Pinkett shamefully raising his hand, waiting for another colleague to jump in. Councilman Pinkett, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, sir. I had a question. I guess this is for Director Raymond again, in reference, Director Edwards, in reference to the senior meals. I believe that it was mentioned that the meals will be being distributed by the Food Bank, Meals on Wheels, and Salvation Army. I'm just kind of curious, and maybe I just don't know much about the Salvation Army. Do they actually prepare meals?
Yes, and they have a kitchen set up at the Camden Yards location.
Oh, that the Salvation Army set up?
Yes, sir.
And because I guess what I was asking, or in any of these situations, do the entity that we have contracted with, do they then have a subcontract or contract with the caterer or some other meal provider that is beyond our contract?
So I am not aware of them subcontracting. Again, the Salvation Army and the Meals on Wheels partnership is led by the Health Department and the Department of Aging. But it is my understanding, Councilman, that these are, Salvation Army is known for doing disaster relief, all over the country. So this is a part of one of their core functions as an organization, and they are providing the meals directly. However, Councilman Pinkett, I would like to say that there are other partnerships that we are working on in order to activate the Baltimore restaurant community. There are two things I think the council should take into consideration. The first is our meal distribution strategy is based on getting tens of thousands of meals out per day. And so the level of scale that we need in order to be able to cover the ground in the city prior to COVID-19, we had 166,000 residents who were receiving SNAP benefits and who are food insecure. That was prior to COVID-19. And so part of the strategy absolutely was contracting with organizations who have the infrastructure to be able to provide large scale meals on a daily basis in a pandemic, in an emergency situation. However, we too are very concerned and very eager to activate the Baltimore restaurant market as a part of the effort. And so that is happening through some of the partnerships that we have with philanthropy. You would not see that in the expenditures that you are looking at from the city, but through our partnership with World Central Kitchen, through our partnership with the Fund for Educational Excellence, we have asked that all of those dollars get directed towards the local economy so that we can include restaurants, nonprofits, and others in this strategy. We have had to do that creatively, so it isn't obvious in the document that you have in front of you, but I do want you to know that our strategy team is very committed to making sure that Baltimore restaurants and Baltimore caterers are a part of the effort. The final thing I will say about this, Councilman Pickett, is that we also, when we are doing this, are absolutely looking at the cost. So when we do the federal meals program, we are limited to $3 per meal. When we are doing the Meals and Wheels and Salvation Army strategy, the average is $6 a meal, $7 a meal. When you do that with local restaurants and you lose that scaling, as you might imagine, the cost, the business model is very different. And so that is why we use philanthropy and partnerships for the restaurant activation, because the cost difference associated, that's one of the considerations, is the cost difference associated when you're working with 20 different organizations versus 3 or 4 organizations where they can provide at the level of scale at a cost that's affordable to the city.
Okay. Thank you. I'm looking at an article back in April that talks about the Salvation Army and their efforts to bring 10,000 meals. It says that the collaboration is the Salvation Army, the Ravens, the Orioles, Rogue Catering. Is Rogue Catering a minority caterer?
I would have to defer to the health department and the Department of Aging on that particular partnership and that contract, because that's the part of the seniors meals program, and they're the lead agency for that.
Do you happen to know what the dollar amount is for that contract?
For the Salvation Army?
Yes.
I would defer to Henry and Daniel Ramos on those specifics.
I don't have it handy, but I can follow up with it, Mr. Vice Chair.
Okay. So in a scenario like that, we don't have a contract with Rogue Catering, do we?
No, we have a contract with the Salvation Army as a part of the COVID-19 response.
So we pay Salvation Army and then they make the determination of who they subcontract with.
I can't speak to Salvation Army's business model, Councilman Pinkett. I can tell you that our relationship is with the Salvation Army, but I'm happy to do some further information gathering and to report back to you on that.
Yeah, I mean, and I just think it's important, especially if we know that the scenario ultimately be some of these partners will be pass-throughs where they are subcontracting to another entity, that that we be mindful that there are potentially minority contractors that can fulfill those roles as well as local. I don't believe that Rogue is either a local caterer or a minority caterer. I think we should be more vigilant about that. May I continue, Mr. Chair?
Please.
Director Raymond, I noticed on the presentation there was allocated $3.7 million for rental assistance. Can someone speak to how many households were helped with that and what agencies are dispersing those resources?
The question is how many households in which agency?
Yes.
Got it. So for that would be DHCD is taking lead on that program, and I think it's still in development, and they're working through some of the details. I'm not sure if Commissioner Braverman or someone is here.
So have we distributed? Because I think it says, and I don't have it in front of me. I think it says that we've we distributed $3.7 million.
That's an error. There shouldn't be any expenses in April. The budget.
Because I was just like, I don't recall seeing $3.7 million.
No, I'm sorry. That is an error on our part. The program is $13 million. The budget for the program is $13 million, and I believe HCD is working through, the stages of getting that dispersed.
Yeah, I think, Councilman Pinkham, I think the mayor just made the announcement of that program this week, so I don't think that they've moved into implementation yet.
Yeah, Councilman Pinkett, Matt Stegman again. As was just mentioned, I mean, that program was just announced this week. So there was an announcement approving the funds for it. DHCD is right now in the process of developing that program and setting the eligibility criteria, but the program will absolutely be in place prior to the eviction moratorium being lifted. Obviously, that is in place. That moratorium is in place right now, and the program will be up and running in time to protect folks before that moratorium is lifted.
Yeah. Okay. Got you.
And as more information becomes available on that program, we'll certainly be in touch with members of the council to make sure that you all know about it and how your constituents can access it.
Okay. In addition, while we're on that same spreadsheet, it also notes Code Red heat fans, 1.3 million. What's that?
Malcolm, are you on?
This is Leslie. That's for senior buildings to have access to being cooled off during the hot time of the summer.
Okay. So we don't typically. It's kind of interesting that we don't. Outside of the pandemic, I guess we didn't care about the seniors.
I wouldn't say that, but during this pandemic, even though that they are more vulnerable to COVID-19, that they just the population is being closer with that being so that their needs are being taken care of.
Okay. Thank you. I just had two more questions, and then I'll get out of your hair. The presentation also showed for April a $5 million small business stimulus allocation. Do we anticipate any more resources being available for small business?
So the application for the small business grants closes this Friday. So we expect for BDC to be able to turn around, distribute the funds, and report back on the results. At that point, we would make the determination kind of holistically within all of our other expenses and revenue loss about additional funding.
I'm sorry. So So have we distributed any of this 5 million yet, or it's still in the application process?
Yeah, Daniel, let me jump in here. So Councilman, small business reopening recovery package includes 4 different spending components. As I mentioned earlier, $100,000 dedicated to grants to local makers and manufacturers of PPE to transition their business models to be able to essentially produce PPE. $400,000 is going to procurement of PPE specifically from Baltimore City local makers and manufacturers. As I mentioned before, the 2 awards, one of which went to Citywide Youth Development. $1.5 million is going to Design by Distancing. That's an effort to assist Main Street areas in terms of outdoor seating, social distancing guidelines and signage, things like that. And then $3.5 million is going to small business grants up to the amount of $15,000. That period for the application closes on Friday, May 15th at 11:59 p.m. And the criteria for how those loans or those grants, pardon me, those are grants, not loans, will be dispersed is being done, is listed on BDC's special website at www.baltimoretogether.com. The program intentionally has not distributed any of those grants yet for a couple key reasons. One, as we saw with federal and state support programs, when applications went live, they ended up closing as soon as the money ran out. So you would have different programs where the application period ended up closing as soon as they met the total demand that they had offered up within a 1 or 2 day period. So it was important to the mayor to ensure that everyone had a fair shot at getting those funds. So that was the thought process behind why the administration ended up opting to do a program where they left the application period open. They didn't want it to be first come, first serve. And I would note that the focus of the disbursement of those funds, one, there's a heavy focus on, restaurants, barbershops, salons, small businesses like that are kind of like the anchor of the neighborhood, if you will, that everyone knows that neighborhoods need to do well in order to survive. In addition to address 2 other populations that had been previously excluded from other support programs because they were disqualified either because they were a business owner who had a felony on their record. We have our fair share of those in the city, as well as businesses that may have been run by an immigrant, not a full U.S. citizen. And we know we have our fair share of those in our city. And we know that both of those 2 populations are in many cases, across the board, those businesses are strong community partners. And I think, and I know this from my role as the co-chair of the Small Business Task Force, is that what the administration was trying to accomplish is to ensure that everyone had a fair shot at being able to secure additional support. So that's kind of the thought process. And I'm not speaking for the administration. I'm just sharing my perspective from having been involved in a party to those conversations.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. And the hope is obviously that those dollars get out the door as quickly as possible. I know that you know just as well as I do, and I don't know if the dollars would make the difference, but like the City Cafe and I think Joe Square, some restaurants that have been staples, are closing, and I'm quite sure others are in jeopardy as well. So I appreciate your leadership on that.
No, thank you, Councilman. And I'll tell you, this is going to be a really dark time for our city, to be honest with everyone. I would not be surprised if we're in a situation where 30-40% of the restaurants in our city don't reopen. So I think that everyone who's involved in those efforts is very sensitive to that and understands that, when you talk about a business like City Cafe, for example, which is in my district, but most of the people on this call have dined at or had a drink at some time in their life. It's a neighborhood anchor. Gino and Bruce they live in Fells Point, but they're members through and through of that Mount Vernon community, like many of these restaurants throughout all 290 neighborhoods in our city. So, I think everyone is very sensitive to that, Councilman. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
And Mr. Chair, and that's why this resolution was important to me. It wasn't necessarily to challenge, whether people are following the proper procurement processes. I believe that everybody's doing the best they can and with good intentions. It's just the fact that we know that millions of dollars are going to be spent for emergency procurement, and we've got to figure out to have a way to have win-wins where those monies can meet the need of our community, but at the same time keep our businesses going. And I think we could do a better job of that to make certain that if you're utilizing food, let's figure out how to use a local restaurant. If you're doing catering, let's figure out how to keep these people working and these businesses open. We've got to. Every dollar that we spend needs to be spent on a local business, supporting them so that they can at least keep their workers employed and keep their business operating. I think I've asked enough. I appreciate the time, Mr. Chair. I would ask that we could just recess this in case we want to come back and look at our progress as it relates to the emergency spending, because unfortunately we're going to be in this for a while.
Absolutely. Colleagues, any other questions?
Yeah, I got another one.
Councilman Schleifer, you're up.
Got another two. I'll ask you actually the first one because you were mentioning about with the businesses. I had requested of the administration a couple things. My understanding that you guys have been working on in the task force, so it'd be great if you can share an update. And one of them is about how our businesses are able to evolve to meet the new realities. And so on the most basic level, we're referencing like restaurants that want to go to outdoor seating. So, putting aside the grants that some people will get, some people won't, but any restaurant that wants to now get a permit easily to, have outdoor seating and do all that stuff, my request was to have those permit fees waived, but also make the process a lot easier because we know we have a lot of mom and pop shops that don't have the resources to necessarily go through all the paperwork and everything that's normally would have to be done in order to, set up an outdoor seating arrangement. And so I want to know if you can speak to that at all.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of work going on in terms of working to streamline and simplify the minor privilege process. For those that aren't aware, in order to get a minor privilege for outdoor seating, it requires, and if you have a liquor license, it requires an application and a hearing through the liquor board. It requires, depending on your existing zoning, an application at a minimum to zoning. If zoning denies it because it requires a BMZA hearing, it requires an additional application fee as well as a licensure fee once approved by BMZA. In addition, there are 4 inspections that are required. You have to get a fire, a health, and 2 from housing, an electrical and a building if you have electric running out there. So it's a pretty onerous process. I think all of us on the council can appreciate how ridiculous that process is because we've all dealt with a constituent business who's trying to do the right thing and be able to serve folks in the neighborhood and expand their business, and it's challenging. So there's been a lot of work around how to streamline that process, how to simplify it, how to provide relief around it. And I can tell you that, progress is being made on it. And, from my perspective, the administration has been very receptive to the concerns that have been raised around that issue. And, the task force, we've encouraged them to think through it from the perspective of the customer, not the perspective of fire safety or health safety or zoning hearing or any of that stuff. And they were extremely receptive to that request from me and Shalonda. Shalonda Stokes is the other co-chair. And, I can already see, just the improvements in terms of the discussions around how they do that. And some of the things that I've heard in conversations, have been to the effect of, as opposed to, well, they need to fill out this form and they got to pay that fee and they got to call this 311 number, to I've started to hear, this week things like, well, how do we consolidate that into one form? Is there a way we can make it easier for the customer? Is there a way that we can have one focal point of contact? So a lot of those things I think are being addressed. And I'm hopeful that, in the near future, we'll see something tangible on that. But your point is very well taken. I'm going to speak for everyone on the committee as the chair of the committee, and that we all recognize that process is very painful and onerous and is not customer friendly. And, I think the administration agrees wholeheartedly and has been very responsive and very receptive to that concern as they work to figure it out. So your comment very well received, Councilman.
Okay, so that's my first thing. And my second thing was I just wanted to make a statement. I just looked up the link that Matt had sent around with the food stuff, and still there's nothing listed there where, this couple that reached out to me that are not seniors, do not have kids, and their unemployment has not gotten to their account yet, still don't have a way to get those meals. So I'm hoping that either Matt or somebody else in the mayor's office of family success gives me a call with a solution this evening.
Well, I think certainly everyone wants to make sure that everyone is fed in the city, Councilman. I think that it's important to note the scale of this operation in the context of the discussion. And what I heard Tisha say is that she's going to make sure to follow up with you after this hearing is over. I have every expectation that that will be the case. When Tisha says she's going to do something, she follows through. So I'm hopeful that you'll be able to work that out with Tisha's team and continue to go to them when you identify folks who are in need, because this is a team effort. Everyone needs to be on the same page, and everyone, I think, is trying to make sure that they're doing the most and the best that they can in terms of helping people. But I can only assume that, and I'm not going to call on Tisha to speak, but she said she'll be in touch with you. So I think you can reasonably expect a response today.
Thank you.
Colleagues, any other questions? City Schools, I know you were on the phone with us. We appreciate you being with us. In the interest of everyone's time, if there's no specific questions for City Schools, we're gonna skip over your report. Colleagues, are there any concerns with that? Seeing that there are no concerns, and one last call for questions of the agencies, colleagues. When Councilman Pinkett will honor your request, we will go into recess on this hearing. Thank you all and have a great evening. Please stay safe and healthy.
Thank you.
Thank you.